Thanks for coming today. It's really good to see all of you. My name is Carrie Franklin. I'm in English and I'm the Director of Assessment at January. We've invited on campus Charlie Blaich and
Kathy Wise.
Kathy Wise. Kathy Wise.
You got the hard name, but not the easy one.
I know. It's a long day. It has been a long day. And we're so glad they're here. They're going to tell you a little bit about their background and what they do. But the main goal of the school, their visit has been to go around and talk to different groups, talk to students, talk to faculty, talk to the provost, talk to the president, talk to just everybody, students, nursing students, and just get to know what's happening with assessment, what's going on with assessment at the university right now. We're kind of in a little bit of a time of transition, and so, but also the provost suggested, well, if they're going to come, he said it'd be really great for them to be able to do a presentation about general education assessment. He goes, people are wondering about it. They could really provide some input and feedback at this time. And it was a great idea, so here they're going to talk about that, and just glad that you're all here. Thanks for coming.
Good afternoon. How you doing? That was nice. The sarcastic swell. So yeah, as Carrie said, I'm Charlie. This is Kathy. Okay. This is not. So let me just give you a little background, and I will repeat for people who've seen us earlier today. This will be a repeat, but for new folks, they should get a little of this. So we both are working at Wabash College in Crawfordsville, Indiana. It's a tiny men's college, 900 students strong, a really small little liberal arts college. But we run this thing called the Center of Inquiry in Liberal Arts, a very pretentious title. We also run something called the Higher Education Data Sharing Consortium. We've been doing this for about 10 years, so even though I was a faculty there, Kathy and I have been working nationally for about 10 years on assessment. So how did nice people like us get involved? Assessment, right? And the story is like this. We had the Wabash being located in Indiana. There is something called the Lilly Pharmaceutical Company. You may have heard of them. They had something called Prozac. You may have heard of that. It generated enormous pre-tax profits 1 year, and the Lilly Pharmaceutical Company is actually the majority shareholder is owned by a philanthropy in the state. It's called Lilly Endowment. And half the endowment actually goes to things that have nothing to do with our work. It has to do with like church-related philanthropies. They do for religion studies. They also do a lot of work actually for Katrina. They do work for the state municipalities and so on. But they have a chunk of their work is for Indiana colleges and universities. And so Wabash was the recipient of a very large grant that, a $20 million grant at the time, to support the liberal arts. Literally, that's all was in the grant. So that's like a 2.5-page long thing. They clearly were dumping these profits out to a bunch of schools. I was sort of a faculty member and kind of serving as assistant dean of the college at the time on strategic planning. And we had this center, this money. We got 2000, and actually no one knew what to do with it. And so the story goes on that as a faculty member, I was sent off to it's no longer existing, the American Association of Higher Education meeting, AAHE it was called. And I went there, it was in Boston, and I was just doing bird research and teaching students some research methods and so on. And suddenly I go into this big meeting, and there's all sorts of people talking about accountability and holding schools, that people weren't being held accountable for the work they were doing, education costs were going up too much, we needed to do standardized testing, and frankly, it scared the bejesus out of me, what was going on with this thing. And so I started doing some reading, and clearly this whole accountability piece was coming along, standardized testing was coming along. And so when I got back, I literally wrote a memo, actually while I was there, so I wrote a memo saying, this whole accountability thing is a little scary. I said, on the one hand, I actually do respect the idea of using evidence for improvement. I've been doing scholarship teaching and learning courses for years. I didn't know that's what it was called, but that's what I was doing. But we fear this whole standardized testing piece, the way sometimes accreditors are working and fumbling to stay relevant, that might be pushing schools in bad ways. What's our way to use this new center we had to support institutions that really want to do assessment in a genuine way, that is connected with faculty and students and staff to improve classes, not from an accountability standpoint, not from the standpoint of proving to the outside world that you're actually doing what you say you're doing, just for improvement, to feed the hunger of faculty and staff to improve their work for students. And so my president said, okay, do it. And so we started actually working with a variety of research projects with the National Survey of Student Engagement. We started something called the Wabash Study, which is a big national longitudinal research project looking at students from a bunch of schools. Kathy will talk about that in a second. And we've been philanthropic for all these years. We're not high-priced consultants. We literally, for the last 10 years, have been doing workshops, visiting institutions, working with institutional data, working with students directly, doing all kinds of things with the goal simply of helping people on campuses use evidence for improvement. And our mission is actually to help strengthen liberal education. We work with a variety of institutions, and we do so through using evidence, and that's it. And so we happened to be at a meeting, Kathy and I were at a meeting on assessment last January or February in Boston on assessment, and I happened to sit down next to Karen. And we had a session where somehow they forced us to talk to each other. That's group work with the people, make it interactive. And we started talking about assessment a little bit and about the work here. We had some phone calls. And it seems like you're an interesting place. You've got a lot of good stuff going on. You're also transitioning in some ways, some turnover institutional assessment, IR, and so on. And so Carrie asked us, Kathy and I come out to do a visit, talk to folks, and get a sense of how things are working here, and see if, based on our experience, we could make some suggestions about things might change or consider adopting through the process, make it easier. And frankly, our view is, I don't want to use the word efficient, but frankly, so that there work results in gains for your students. That's that perspective. So that's why we're here. So what we're going to talk about today is sort of the results of our experience. We work with about 200 colleges and universities, a lot of them on general education assessment. We've worked with some schools for 6 or 7 years, which means we're really ineffective. We have to keep working with them. And so we'll talk about some of the things that we have learned in terms of setting up gen ed assessment from working with folks and things that have worked and things that haven't worked. And the first step in doing that is to talk a little bit about the Wabash study. Kathy's going to do that because that's the basis of some of what we've done.
Yes, so we wanted to start by sharing a little background information about the Wabash study because, as Charlie said, this is a project that we've been working on for 7 or so years, longer if you count the time it took to do the pilot study and to design the study. But this is a research and assessment project, and our work on the Wabash study, both the research findings and things we learned from analyzing the data in the study, as well as our work with institutions in the study, so the visits we made to the institutions, the phone calls we had, the meetings, everything we did with the institutions was focused on helping them take data from the study, figure out how to make sense of it, and then figure out how to use that data to improve their courses, their programs, their departments, and make their institution better. And so our work, both on the analytical side and working with institutions, is really where we've learned these best practices for assessing general education, or really just assessment in general. So, just to give you a little background on the Wabash study, fairly quickly. Wabash study involved 49 institutions. I will show you a list of the institutions later, but a wide range of institutions, both public, private, 4-year, some 2-year schools, a range of selectivity from all over the country, range of students, range of missions. And we followed 17,000 students through 4 years of college in this study. And it was a longitudinal study. We collected data, well, not us actually, very hardworking, dedicated people at these 49 schools. Got students to sit down at 3 points during their college career, first when they walked in the door, then at the end of their first year, and then at the end of 4 years. So we had data on who the students were when they first came to college, sort of a baseline measure. We collected data on their experiences, both in and outside of the classroom. And then we also had some outcome measures, so we could look at what they experienced in their first year of school, what they experienced over 4 years of school, and then see how they changed on these outcome measures. And we looked at outcomes, sort of qualities of both the head and the heart, things that lots of institutions talk about in their mission statements, sort of broad general education goals, things like critical thinking, moral reasoning, socially responsible leadership, well-being, interest in the arts and sciences, attitudes towards literacy, attitudes and openness towards diversity, interested in working on intellectually challenging problems. So those are the sorts of outcomes we were looking at. We weren't looking at content things, knowledge things, just those sort of attitudes, values. And our purpose in the study, this wasn't about benchmarking institutions, creating some new ranking measure. Our purpose was really to identify the practices and conditions that promoted liberal arts education, or that helped students grow on these outcomes. So that was our focus, taking this data, figuring out what practices and institutional conditions were effective and helping institutions use that data to improve. So we have lots of research studies, tons and tons of research studies. We had folks at the University of Iowa, University of Michigan, Miami University. We have graduate students, now actually they're faculty members all over the country who wrote tons of dissertations and published articles on this. But what Charlie and I did, we spent our time working with faculty, staff, administrators at the institutions trying to use this data to make sense of it and improve their programs.
I just want to think too.
Yes.
Just again, and so literally we had over each institution we worked with, we had over 800 different pieces of information on each student. Not just from our study, we connected with campus measures, we also with GPA, retention, persistence, we really had a lot of stuff.
So as I said, 49 institutions were in this study, and this is part of them. There's two slides with the names of the institutions. But this slide lists the larger institutions as well as the community colleges. And here you can just see the range of institutions. So we had regional institutions like Butler, like Worcester State, Millersville, then we had some research-intensive places, Notre Dame, Rhode Island, Worcester Polytechnic, different kind of school, North Carolina A&T, and HBU. So again, range of institutions here, range of missions, range of students. And then a slew of small liberal arts colleges. But again, here you've got a range of schools. So again, varying admission standards, varying student bodies, varying sizes. Marlborough College, that's 300 students located at the campus was a few farms that sort of became a college in rural Vermont. We had the pleasure of visiting there in the winter. I wore heels. It was a bad idea, especially during the campus tour.
It's called a mud season.
Yeah, I should have done that. Columbia College is an all-women's college in South Carolina. Very diverse student body too, about half African American, half white. Blackburn College is a work college. Wabash College, where we're from, an all-male institution. With some very selective places here, and then some that are much less selective. So again, range of schools, and the reason I'm highlighting the range of institutions here is because the things that we learned, sort of the best practices that we learned in terms of assessment, in terms of what matters for students and their growth and development in college, those things apply for all of these institutions. So it doesn't matter if you're a four-year, two-year research institution, regional institution, private liberal arts college, these things apply to all of those schools. Now, schools will enact the best practices differently because obviously every place has a different culture, a different environment, so you can't just take something and from one place and plop it into your environment, but the best practices work for everyone.
Yeah, one of the things that's kind of fun about this is that when we started this, Kathy used the phrase liberal arts education, and we come from a small liberal arts college, and originally our benefactors at Lilly, many of whom came from small liberal arts colleges like Wabash, wanted to use this research to prove the case that liberal arts colleges were special and different. We didn't set it up that way. We chose potentially a broad range of institutions, and what you find out is that the traditional markers of prestige, of selectivity, do not in any way identify the schools that are best at promoting student learning. Okay? And that the practices that matter for students actually are really similar across campuses. The question is, what proportion of students are experiencing? That becomes a real question. That even within certain categories like research universities or regional institutions, that even though they look the same to us, we use those terms in higher education, the culture of those institutions, the way they do things really differs dramatically. And so making use of evidence, changing things, doing faculty development, all has to be embedded within a particular culture. And the way we cut up higher education, we talk about it nationally at meetings, actually doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense. When you look at what's going on. Okay. So the best practice, so these are best practice. What we mean by best practice, oopsies, edit that out. So what we mean by best practices are practices that result in actual change. That is, what are the things that people do with assessment that result in more than just generating reports, but actually result in improvements in student learning? Okay. And so these are the ones that over the course of our work institutions we have seen. So step one, institutions that we work with and have helped, we think, that have drawn the most benefit from assessment actually approach this as a what I would call multi-method, multi-level inquiry about student learning. That is, they use different kinds of, some use quantitative pieces, but they also use qualitative pieces. Right? They try and see how the results from different kinds of interviews and focus groups connect with data on pedagogies or student outcomes. That they take a very ecumenical, multi-method approach on those things. Also multi-level. So what I mean by that is institutions that we work with that tend to do well are trying to do this sort of triangulation and integration piece where they're looking at sometimes department level or course level data, but also thinking about institutional survey data, might be thinking about program or college level data. And so in a way, what this actually looks like, and this is kind of funny about this looking back, is places that are doing good inquiry about student learning and getting useful results are actually kind of doing liberal education. They are thinking about this as a problem of what are different kinds of methods I can use to ask about a question, interdisciplinary work, and how can I think about this both from the level of my department or course, but how's it connecting with the broader stuff? What's the connection between the data I'm seeing in the survey and what I'm seeing in my department? So it's actually a very difficult intellectual exercise. Campuses do well are doing these things. They don't do the phrase we've coined, they're not method idolatrists, right? They don't have a method. And you often will hear this, like, well, I only use quantitative methods, that's what I believe in. Those places don't do, I only use qualitative methods, I only believe in interview stuff. They actually are doing this in an interdisciplinary, multi-method sort of way. Second piece, we've tried to talk about this. This is a challenging one because there's a group called the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment, NILOA, and they've done surveys on this. A lot of institutions, a lot of departments do assessment because they've been told to do something. And even though the accreditors say, no, we don't want that. We want you to do assessment for improving student learning. We want you to do this as a real process where you're thinking about your courses and your students and making things better and making choices there. Most faculty we've worked with, most institutions, most provosts view assessment as something they've been pushed into because it's required for by accountability. That's just the reality. And the challenge is that doing assessment for accountability, doing assessment or gathering and using evidence to ensure the quality of your program to outsiders, to ensure it to accreditors, to ensure it to your state legislatures, other folks to make that assurance, is actually a very different process than the way you use evidence to improve the quality of student learning in your courses and programs. Okay? And people have written about this, Peter Yule's talked about this, but the difference between proving to external audiences and improving. Okay? So when you prove to external audiences, this is the simple difference. When you're proving the case to external audiences, you are making the best possible case for your institution. You're making the best case for your department. You're highlighting the things you do well. And you're trying to show to others that you're meeting some minimum standards and that they can rely on your efforts to produce good work, and therefore you're worthy of funding, financial aid, etc. That's a noble and worthy process. When you're doing improvement work and you're looking at the quality of your department or the quality of a gen ed class or whatever else, frankly, to do it well, if you want to improve it, you have to search for weakness. You have to intentionally try and identify both things you're doing doing well, but also look for areas where things are not going so well. Okay? That's just a fundamental part of the improvement game. If you're worried in the process of trying to look for things that aren't going well in your department, then, oh dear Lord, if people find out we're not doing this well, we will lose funding, we'll lose a position. Something bad will happen, well, you're sure as hell not going to talk about it, right? You're not going to engage in the kind of inquiry and question raising you have to do to actually address that problem. And so these things can travel in very different ways. And so the places that work really well typically will have people who are doing and focusing on accreditation. They see their job as sort of gathering up and summarizing the good work that people are doing around the campus to improve things and so on. They're going to highlight the strengths, and that's good. They have a separate process for departmental assessment and improvement, which often focuses on a faculty development approach, which is helping faculty do inquiry about their courses and programs, staff to inquiry about those things, and to highlight things that aren't going as well, target areas for improvement, that they're creating an environment where they're not worried about losing resources if things aren't going well, and in fact, they actually gain resources if things aren't going well to help them address problems. The more you blend these two things, the harder it is to do. And I'll use two examples. If, for example, I'll use an academic one and a commercial one. Kathy and I have written an article for this Liloa thing that's gotten cited a lot. If I was still worried about tenure, I might put our citation index. I don't even actually look it up. Okay? And so it looks really cool. See, this is a highly cited article. Well, Kathy and I wrote like 36 drafts of that article. We circulated around and people said it was poorly written. They made changes on it. They revised it. We sent it off to George Koo edited it, and he edited the crap out of it. And so that final article that's out there is a nice article, but frankly, it was our work plus a lot of people sort of digging and making it better. Well, if I was going to if I still put it in portfolios, I wouldn't say, I said, here, this is a highly cited article. I wouldn't say, yeah, actually we revised this 35 times. I was using passive voice too much in the beginning. The points weren't clear. Here's the things we weren't doing. But that revision process and that sort of putting it giving it to other people to revise it was necessary to make it strong. The other example I would give is I have an iPhone. I love my iPhones. Incredibly responsive to my touch. Right? Last year, as I understand, when those phones were first manufactured, about 40% of the screens were rejected. Literally, 40% of the phones coming off the line, there are millions of phones coming off the line each month, were thrown away. Okay. Apple will highlight the quality of its products in its ads. It's going to say, this thing's amazing. Look, you just touch it. It moves wonderfully. They don't take their ads and say, yes, we were rejected. Millions of our manufacturing process is terrible. Millions have failed our test. And yet that kind of scrutiny and quality control is necessary to create the final product. These are two different processes. And so institutions have to think carefully about how they separate this. Okay, two more points quickly here. Focus. This is also critical. We just came from a campus 3 weeks ago that had 40 student learning outcomes for their general education requirements. That happened because good people, smart people, creating a general education program is, as you may be aware, a political process that requires bringing people from different constituencies, and sort of everyone got their learning outcomes. No one could say no. Now they're left with 40 of these things. How on earth will you assess with any integrity 40 learning outcomes? They're going to create this process that is huge and bulky and large, and people complain about it, but in a sense are a victim of their own work. The places that we work with well find a way to focus on one or two things per year with intensity, complete the project, and move to something else. They have to have few enough learning outcomes that they can focus. Because people are really busy, to make this stuff work well, it can't be this all-consuming process where you're spending more time generating reports and doing other things. You are just focusing on making sense of some information and trying to identify some changes. So focus. Last thing, communication. The institutions, we've actually got to the point where we workshop institutions on assessment. We spend literally teams, working with institutional teams. We actually have them develop communication plans because the theory of communication most institutions we work with is that we will write a report, we will post it on our website, and we'll send an attachment via email out to the campus. And then change will happen. Okay. Of course, it doesn't. It doesn't happen at all. People don't read reports. We had practical experience with this. In the Wabash study, the second year, we spent, Kathy and I are the center of inquiry. Those 2 or 3 people, not a big organization. And the second year, we were putting out, we were doing summaries of these massive studies, and we were killing ourselves writing these huge summaries and developing reports and tables, and so it's 300 pages long. I mean, we get a lot of pages per person developing in my shop. And we were putting those out there. So we decide to see if people are actually looking at them. We distributed them via Google Docs. So you can actually track when they're open. And then one of the most disappointing things was to see all these reports that we slaved over, we looked at, we formatted, we did lots of complicated analyses, and all of a sudden, no one was reading it. It was only when we were doing a site visit that someone would say, all of a sudden you start seeing the website almost, right? Okay, so that's what's happening. And so the idea of really thinking ahead of time of your modes of communication, the target audiences who needs to hear things, how will you format this in a very short executive summary, short piece, which ones of these things will be conversationally based and so on, that literally you can gather all sorts of evidence and information, but if people don't see it or read it, doesn't come to their consciousness, what impact will it possibly have? And that takes a lot of careful thought of how you're going to do that. Ways of doing it well, but it's not just sending out reports. The last thing I'll say on this is there's some research on this, by the way, you know. So there are people in the science field, and one of the challenges in the field of science instruction is that for years now people are working on nice, interesting pedagogies that are much more effective at helping students learn in the STEM fields. But one of the frustrations is that people aren't using it. And it's out there, people aren't using it. So people have to look at what are the best methods of disseminating information or getting faculty to learn new practices based or research-based. And what this one study looked at, which was meta-analysis, said, looking over hundreds of different projects, that the prevailing theory was that faculty would improve their teaching by reading research, seeing a report, and then changing their classroom. And it doesn't work any more than I used to play football, become a better football player by reading a book. Okay? It doesn't happen. And it turns out the things that are effective are long-term focused, involve workshopping, involve skill acquisition, those kinds of things. Okay. Last piece here, this is a conceptual piece of model that I think is important, that we think are important for assessment programs. And that's to conceptualize, when you're thinking about courses or departments or programs, to think of three things in doing the assessment. This is not new to us. This is not new to us. We don't have any new and original ideas. This is actually a way of thinking about stuff that a guy named Alexander Aston at UCLA pioneered in the late 60s. It's called the IEO model, the Inputs, Experiences, Outputs model. It's actually a really smart way of thinking about things. It's proven to be really useful. And Alexander Aston was Gomez's brother, if you ever watched the episode. That's his great thing. So what are the three things? And this is really important, is when you're doing an assessment project, once you look at your course, the first thing you want to know is what are students bringing into it? Where do they start? And I know that there's this, when we first got here on campus, we heard this sort of bad stuff about pre-post. It sounds like pre-post has some really bad karma here. It seems to me something different than we've heard. For our work, longitudinal following students over time is usually the best. And I think there's a lot of research to back that up. You get a sense of how they change. But looking at a course, looking at a program, what do students do? What are their assumptions? What do they know? Do you have a handle on that? Because if you're going to look at what they learn at the end of the day or where they end up, you kind of got to know where they start. And it's not just on the outcome, but it's on their dispositions, their interest in their theory of how they change, what they know about your subject. A lot of research on science education is that students, how they understand theories is based in part on the theories they bring into the course. How they hear the new ideas are. Second, experiences. When they're in your course or program, what kind of pedagogies are they experiencing? And we're going to come to this later. Not what kind of pedagogies do you think you're doing, this is critical. What kind of pedagogies do they experience? We'll come back to this. So, are they lectures? Are they doing group work? Okay. What kind of exams are they getting? Are they being asked to analyze and synthesize things? So what are they experiencing in terms of pedagogies and learning during the class? And then the last thing is outcomes. And people want copies of these slides, we'll leave them here. But the point is, what do they actually change on? And the whole point of this approach is to be able to, the whole point of looking at experiences is if your growth in the outcome is not satisfactory, not where you'd like it to be, for all or some of your students, then you can start asking questions, well, was it the teaching? Was it the kind of assignments I used, the experiences that mattered? Or did they come in a different way, assuming the wrong thing about when they came in? So focusing on outcomes, in a sense, if you don't get what you want, doesn't give you what I would call diagnostic, actionable information about what move I might make if things aren't going as well as I would like, or if things are going really well.
Experience is what has an impact on how much students grow. So it's not things like the structure of a program or course, the particular program, whether it's one of the high impact practices, Are there learning communities for students in their first year? Are they going on study abroad? Do they have an internship? And it's not, this is going to be kind of shocking, it's not the structure of the curriculum that matters. It is what students experience within that structure. So, lately a lot of places are looking at high impact practices, things like learning communities and first year seminars, internships, study abroad, research with faculty. And one of the things we saw in our study is that those things can have an impact when they are done well. So when students have good experiences in them, and I'll talk more about what those good experiences are and what being done well means. But so those high impact practices are effective when they're done well and students have good experiences. But when they're not done well and students have poor experiences in them, they don't matter, and in fact they can have a negative impact. And so if people just look at the name of the program or the structure, you won't have a sense of what its impact is going to be. Another way of looking at this is thinking about the structure of the curriculum, perhaps the structure of general education. You just went through a process to revise your general education program. And a lot of institutions we work with have struggled with that because that's a messy, hard process. So I think at the end of the day, you can have a general education curriculum that is innovative and flashy and incorporates integrative learning and lots of high impact practices, because lots of schools we've worked with have talked about trying to create programs like that. You can have a structure like that. But if it's not done well, if students don't have good experiences in that innovative structure, they're not going to learn. On the other hand, if a school has a basic, plain vanilla distribution kind of gen ed structure, but students have good experiences within that, they will learn and grow in the ways that we hope they will. So, what do I mean by students having a good experience? Again, these are findings from the Wabash study. So as I said at the beginning, as Charlie mentioned, we collected tons of data from students on their experiences inside the classroom and outside the classroom. And we also had data on outcomes and how much they changed and grew over 1 year and 4 years. We could look at that and say, okay, what were the experiences that mattered? What experiences contributed to their growth and the outcomes? And we let the data tell us what was important. So we didn't start out with a preconceived idea that these experiences will matter. We literally just did some factor analysis, threw it into the model and said, okay, what matters? And these 4 things came out as being important for students' growth and development. So I'm going to walk through them briefly. First one, and these are all names that we came up with to describe the group of questions on a survey about students' experiences. The first one, something we call good teaching and high-quality interactions with faculty. And that includes things like the extent to which faculty and staff are interested in teaching and student development. So do students feel like their faculty are interested in them more than just getting a good grade? Or are they interested in sort of their life outside of the classroom? Do they talk to them about things other than just the assignments and that course? Do they think the faculty want to be there in the classroom teaching them? It also includes the extent to which students have out-of-classroom interactions with their faculty and staff. And then it includes things like the extent to which courses and programs are organized, are clear, whether their instructors are prepared, and whether students think they get prompt feedback on their assignments. And you'll notice that we have the word faculty in quotes there, and that's because when we talk to students at institutions in the study about these findings and what they were thinking when they answered the questions, we realized that students have a broader view of faculty than we often do. And students would talk about their faculty in terms of adults, caring adults on campus. So it could be the person in the library that they worked for, it could be the coach on their team, it could be the person working in the dining hall who spoke to them every day and asked about their courses and was sort of an ear, someone they could talk to when they were having problems. Could be literally anyone on campus, caring adults. So that's why we emphasize that this applies not just to people teaching the courses, but broader range of people on campus. The second one of the big 4 good practices from the study is academic challenge and high expectations. And this looks at 2 kinds of challenge. So the first is sort of a workload thing. So how much time are students spending preparing for class? And if you've seen the national data, we all know that's much lower than we expect. And it was in the Wabash study too. And most students are spending less than 15 hours a week preparing for class. And we've talked to students who will candidly say maybe 5 hours, and they can go through. And the kind of scary thing is they're often getting really good grades and spending very little time for class. So the workload issue, time spent preparing for class, how much reading are they doing, how much writing are they doing? And then the second part here is the type of work they're doing. So are they doing higher order intellectual tasks, things that require them to integrate information, to analyze, to synthesize, not just memorize and kind of spit back facts. The third of the 4 good practices is something we call interactional diversity, and this is the extent to which students report having meaningful interactions with people who are different from them. And the key part here is meaningful, because a lot of places think that if they have a diverse campus and people talk to each other or they're just near each other in classrooms, that this will happen. But that's not the case, because we've worked with some schools that are structurally very diverse, and they get very low scores on this because students will say, well, sure, we talk to each other, we say hi, we pass each other in the halls, what are you doing tonight? But we don't have meaningful conversations about things that really matter. And those meaningful conversations can often be the more difficult ones to have. And then the last of the big 4 is a group of questions from the National Survey of Student Engagement, something they call deep learning, and that looks at higher order learning, integrative learning, and reflective learning, which asks students the extent to which they learn information that makes them sort of consider their perspectives, consider other people's perspectives, take other people's points of view, perhaps change their beliefs on things. So these 4 experiences are things that help students grow. So we found that when students report higher levels of these things at their institutions, they tend to grow on a variety of outcomes. So I mentioned at the beginning of the study that we measured 12 outcomes. And the important thing about these practices is they help students grow on all of these outcomes. So in a broad range of areas that institutions are interested in. And I think so that's, all right, yes. Last one. So the other thing that we've learned and seen, and one of the questions we often get about the big 4, the good practices, is that, well, you're really just asking students their perception of what happens in classes. And that's true, because all of these questions ask students, how often do you analyze information? To what extent do your classes emphasize analyzing information versus memorizing? How often do you work with other students outside of class? So we're just asking their perceptions. It's self-reported. Yes, that is true. And do we think that students are accurately reporting the number of hours that they spend preparing for class? No. Do I think it's an accurate measure of sort of more or less? Yes, I do, especially based on talking with students. But what we've seen is that students' perceptions of their experience is what matters, not what faculty and staff think students are experiencing. And those 2 groups often have very different views. So I can be teaching a class, I can think I'm incredibly clear and organized, and I've done this. I think everything's just crystal clear, and they know what I'm talking about. And then maybe I don't see like a spark in people's eyes, and I'll ask a question. I realize they had no idea what I just said for the past 30 minutes. So it's important to understand what students are perceiving. Here's a fun little example, I think. So I mentioned the National Survey of Student Engagement before, which asks about students' experiences in and out of the classroom. There's a companion survey, the Faculty Survey of Student Engagement, which asks faculty questions about their courses, and many of the questions are sort of the flip side of the questions that are asked to students. So you can compare what faculty say they're doing in their classes with what students report experiencing in their classes. And you'll often see differences when you do this. So this is data from an actual institution with whom we've worked. And I should say that the differences here, these are questions that you commonly see differences on. So let's look at the first one now. Students frequently ask questions in class or contributed to class discussions. You'll see there's data recorded for first-year students and seniors because they ask faculty about their sort of intro, lower-level classes and then their upper-level classes. So faculty say that students do this, 21%, 46%, so more in the senior and upper-level classes. But well, students report doing a lot more, 56% in first-year classes and 74% upper level. So there's really a difference in perception there. I don't know what's going on, but second one. Students frequently work harder than they thought they could to meet the instructor's standards. Perhaps not surprisingly, students say, well, yeah, first-year students, 58% of the time, yeah, I do this a lot. 64% in the upper level classes, but faculty don't think students are working quite that hard. Prompt feedback results in reverse, with the faculty thinking that they're giving their students prompt feedback much more frequently than students are receiving that. Same thing on how well students examine the strengths and weaknesses of their views on a topic. So faculty think that that is happening more often than students. And this actually is something we've seen a lot in classes where when we talk to faculty and they'll think they're asking their students to do higher order work. And then we talk to students and they're actually not doing it. Sure, you could do that task, doing all sorts of, integrative work and analysis and synthesis, but you could also do it in a much easier way. And students, like everyone, are really good at doing just what you have to do to get the assignment done. And if they're not engaging in that higher order thinking and they turn in the assignment and they get a good grade, they're just going to keep doing it that way. And I think sometimes we all forget that our students aren't us. I know I was certainly guilty of that, and just because I would read everything for every class and outline notes, that's not my students. And it might be one or two of them, but that's not most of them. So the last two, whether courses emphasize memorizing facts and ideas, and students report, yeah, that's sort of the focus much more often than faculty do. And the flip side, faculty think their classes are more likely to emphasize those higher order skills than students are.
And I think the key here is the thing that correlates with learning is not the faculty evaluation, it's the student. And that's the thing, it's just really tricky. As Kathy said, there are a lot of assignments where we imagine that we're doing something that's going to require all sorts of higher order things to do that students can actually be quite successful at by learning.
Exactly. And so I think the other key part here is, since the students' perception of things and their experience is so important, what mechanisms do we have in place to gather that information? Because I can sit there, look at my class, and think I know what they're thinking, what they're experiencing, and sure, sometimes I'd be right, but many times I'd be very wrong. Because sitting in an undergraduate classroom is a long ways back for me now, and I also am not like many of my students, so I need to find ways to get that information from them.
So this is a sort of overview. We have questions, thoughts, disagreements, arguments, rotten tomatoes. Yes.
Rotten potatoes.
Okay.
So once you know this information, how do you go about making those improvements?
So I would say, so let's suppose you got this back. Right? I would still say you don't know enough. I hate to say it, but I think that we've experienced is I'm sorry. But the next step is to actually probably do some. If you have survey data that indicates that something's a little amiss pedagogically, perhaps, the next step is actually do some student conversations and focus groups to really get down to what's going on. To get a bit more information, because you have to get a sense of how students at your institution are answering these things. And then it's actually next up is faculty staff development. Right? So let's suppose you have assignments in which students in your class report are which you think are really asking to do higher order stuff, but the students are coming back and they're just getting that having to do all those things. Then it's a matter of starting to do some work on, well, how do I revise my assignments? How do I change those things? If it comes back after long conversations and it turns out the students here, and I'll say here, but we've been in institutions where students are working on class, on homework and stuff, 8 hours a week on average, 7 hours a week, and getting A's. Well, it turns out they have to work a little harder, and so we work with institutions that have taken different approaches to trying to scale up the difficulty of the work the students have to engage in. Like we had one institution that every department decided to go off and sort of like, what are 3 things we're going to do next semester? It's going to make it a little more academically challenging for our students. And they sort of reported those back to faculty meetings and did things like that. There's another institution that took a very long, like an 8-year approach to gradually working with faculty to gear up the difficulty of assignments and other things and actually successfully move that needle and improve learning over time. So it's a faculty development piece.
So for the faculty,
Does that answer your question?
well, no.
Okay.
So for the faculty that don't want to improve, that think what they're doing is fantastic already, even if the data were to show that the students don't agree,
Right.
then what does one do? Throwing you the easy question.
Yeah. You know, you fire them. I need to, some faculty, I'll tell you faculty. I don't know your governance structure here, but there has to be some means. If you're going to improve student learning, I'll say this, I'll put this as unofficial policies, and here's my belief after doing this for a long time. You have to find mechanisms to reward faculty who are experimenting with and changing things in their classes, trying and failing sometimes, but trying to improve. You have to find mechanisms to highlight and reward those faculty. The faculty who are not doing a good job, there's a couple things you should not do. You should not put them in large section intro classes, which is one move that people make. You should also give them course releasing and research study, and then movie scene classes. You have to have some mechanism to work with and deal with those faculty. And institutions that can't do that, and the portion of faculty which is 30 or 40%, are in a very bad spot. I know this might answer your question, but I don't know your governance mechanisms here for faculty who are doing a poor job in the classroom. I don't know if you're one of those places where faculty do a terrible job in the classroom, but they're bringing in grant money. That's fine. There are those places. So I don't know if you post any review here. I don't know what we're doing. What are you doing to support faculty? I mean, the easier question is to start with, what do you do with the faculty who are doing good work?
I'm sorry?
What do you do with the faculty who are doing good work or trying to do good work? How do you develop new faculty to get into that stance?
One of the things I knew that they're doing something for full professors can apply for salary, like a minimum salary bump.
For merit for teaching?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's they're doing that piece.
But that's for research. Distinguished professors for research productivity.
Is it?
Yeah. Based on their research. No.
So places that have.
Okay, so then that would be something to do to
Yeah,
add.
good job. That'd be really good. So there's different levels of things. So one level is like questions on the administrative level. What are the incentives for doing well? Actually, one of the things we're going to write in our little memo is about that question. I would say a second piece is for people at my point in our careers, and maybe at my point in our career, I don't know or not, but I'm in my 50s. One question that I think the faculty at 50s at places who have been there a while, what are we doing to model? So not just asking administration for help, but what are we doing to model what it means to be a teacher who's engaged in her or his craft and refine that craft over time? Do we invite new faculty into our classroom to watch us? Do we ask them to write reviews of us as we would have been? Do we take some new faculty to teaching learning workshops with us? Do we engage in mentoring work with those folks? In other words, to what extent is your mid to upper tier faculty in your departments, are they engaging in the professional development of their colleagues and your colleagues as teachers? And I can say, well, I've done some of that work. It can be really actually kind of fun. Because when I work in the center, I happen to hire the person to replace me in my department. I had a long period of time where I was teaching a course in a certain way. Bobby Morton is a great person. And when I started with Bobby, he sat in my classes and actually used the same forms we would use for faculty evaluation to review my teaching. And I went in his classes and we'd exchange stuff and we did things. And that kind of work was really helpful for those folks. So the things that we have control over in terms of those kind of things, what are we doing to show the way in our departments for the teaching? Congressional law.
Got a different question. So, just taking two of these things, I'd be inclined to, okay, so this one about coursework often emphasizes memorizing the facts and ideas. I'm perfectly willing to concede or acknowledge that the student's perception, go with student perception. At the same time, the one about how often students ask questions in class, I'm kind of less inclined. So it's like even interpreting the data, they're not all equal, and some of them kind of go on, I don't care what they say, they're not asking questions. Because that I have a little more tangible.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think none of the stuff we don't take.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we never look at the survey data and say, oh, that's it, that's the truth with a capital T, flashing lights. It's always just something to consider, and certainly different. You'll have different classes where some things might be more appropriate, less appropriate. You'll care more about certain things. Different faculty will care more about certain things. We look at all this and say, well, oh, it's interesting, and are there things here that might be something we should pursue?
That's why I didn't answer your question directly afterwards, because sometimes you get data like this, there's an immediate knee-jerk as to what it's telling you, when it's not telling you the thing you might think. And we used an example earlier today of a women's college we visited, where there was a lot of stuff on one of these surveys on the low level of student-faculty interactions in a women's college. The data indicated that compared to their peer institutions, that students were reporting not visiting faculty after class very much, not having conversations with faculty. The dean was really upset because it looked like the faculty were turning away from students because they were doing their research, was considering a policy mandating office hours, open door policies, and things like that. The faculty were nervous as hell about this, and you can imagine why. And we remember visited the first couple of meetings we had with people, everyone was really tense about this. We then started interviewing the students. We interviewed every students, and right from the start, what we heard from the young women there was that, I'm not going to talk to faculty, that's powerful, smart women. I don't need their help to figure this stuff out. And in fact, I know Cassie down the hall did, and I think she's actually, I call it grade grubbing, but she's trying to brown nose for grades. And there was this culture there among the students that became very clear of, no, this is our work, we're going to do this, damn it, and I don't need help doing it. And that's not necessarily a good attitude either.
That's necessarily true.
That's very true. But it's open door policies, and the dean's response was incorrect. And so our thing is, I think we always say that these data always tell you something,
Just not sure.
just not sure what initially, you might need some follow-up.
Yeah, I think that got to my second
Yes.
question in terms of, I just did this thing yesterday, really simple. They had a test Friday,
Yep.
and I just asked them, what do you think of the test?
Yeah.
Okay, this is random thing. And I got this easy, hard, whatever. And the essay question was too hard, okay? So this thing about,
Right.
okay, this tells them what their experience is. It doesn't then say, do they want it to be more challenging and whatever. Do they want to have integrative? They just wanted the multiple choice.
Absolutely. No, that's right. This is hard stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Although we had this experience over and over again. This is really weird. So, I'll say this is fair. I think a summary of our experience would be that students will say this is hundreds of student groups, would be, oh yeah, we definitely will pick the teacher who is a rep for being easy. And we will disrespect the hell out of him. We'll say awful things about him and stuff like that, but we will choose that anyway. The flip side is there's a respect factor in there for faculty. Unfortunately, you hear it. In the conversation, this is the hardest class I took, this is really pushed me back. I think one of the things that faculty have a hard time modulating is the difference between being hard and being a hard ass. Right? There's this thing about being hard, and I think sometimes coaches really get this well, which is really pushing people, but also being incredibly supportive versus just pushing and being rigid. And students will interpret rigidity, oh, you got this in 2 minutes late, you have enough now. As a very different thing than you're going to work. This is not adequate. This is not your best work.
you can do much better. Talk to you how to do that. Those two pieces are very different and here in different ways. I think faculty have a really hard time modulating the challenge piece. Yes.
Was there any kind of data collected that correlated, say, the student experience and individual faculty evaluation, say? Because over the course of the program, they grow more if they experienced challenge, et cetera. But for junior professors without tenure, if your course is a challenging course, even if 4 years ahead, and they're like, oh gosh, I'm sure glad I took that. Of course, that kicked my ass. The short-term repercussions for faculty might be disincentivizing.
Absolutely. So I would say these are often, because they're done with first years and seniors, they're actually done in real time. It wasn't a 4-year reflection. And even in the real time, people had respect for students. Excuse me. Had respect for faculty who pushed them in a caring, hard ass, but caring way. There was some negative, and again, I don't know your faculty tenure evaluation system, I don't know the different surveys you're using.
In general.
Yeah. I think that students respected faculty who pushed them in a caring, hard, demanding, supportive way. That was reflected in reasonably good evaluations. I know how scary that is.
You have to count on everybody being on board, or else you're the hard ass.
Yeah.
To ask an entire, say, department or college even to raise standards is kind of a high bar.
So it's really hard at places where there's not standards, right? Because you become the rock in the water that everyone's throwing around. You become the person. You have to have colleagues in it with you. But, and this is where I want to be really careful. I've been through tenure twice, so I know this process. I managed to get it both times, and I know how vulnerable that feels. And I have a job now from which I can be fired at any time, so it's like a real job. I think at some point there's a professional integrity question, right? The question, when I went through my tenure process twice, each time I asked myself, this is a place where I'm trying to get a job for life. Does its values match mine? And so to me, I always thought of tenure as a mutual tryout. And if I could do all sorts of singing and dancing on stuff that wasn't consistent with what I wanted to do, then I probably didn't want to get tenure there. And it's not because I'm a real smart guy to do that. I just talked to too many faculty over my course of work at different institutions who managed to do something for the 6 years it took to get tenure that they didn't really like to do. Got it. And then also it's like, oh my God, I'm stuck here. And they were unhappy in the long run. So, okay.
Well, but the thought is that even aside from faculty, even in terms of departments and programs and things like this, are students aware during the process that this is good for them? Or will we see actual flight from entire programs? Less, I just want to fill out the multiple choice test and go home and drink.
So you give them alcohol and stuff.
Because the kind of longitudinal study versus in the trenches, I guess, perceptions.
So I think, so you hit on a really important thing there that I didn't mention certainly, which was, it's really important to tell people what the hell you're trying to do.
Yes.
Really important that, and it's even in terms of, and I want to be very careful to frame this the right way. So even telling them that you're asking to synthesize and memorize, this is not marketing. It is actually sort of framing for them, psychology and research says, when you frame problems for them in the appropriate way so they can understand it, they're going to learn better. So literally telling them this is going to be very hard, it's demanding, this is, and talking about that in ways of why it's useful for them to help them understand that is incredibly useful. It's useful to talk about learning outcomes this way. It's useful, it's not, and don't hide the learning outcomes from them, see if they get them. Talk about the learning outcomes, about the pedagogies you're using, the changes you've made based on student feedback in the past. It's really important to do. Be transparent about what you're trying to do, these things, your intentionality towards it. It helps them see what you're doing.
And I think doing that also helps them see that you care about teaching, you care about them, and you...
Like Ronaldo had said, this was the hardest thing I ever did, but it was really worth it at the end. They put that into their syllabus and talk about this is what's going to happen in this course.
The title of this talk was Assessing the General Education Outcomes. And what I see is assessing students' perceptions, but not necessarily assessing general education outcomes.
Right. So I think this is an interesting distinction you're making here at Missouri State University, which is that for us, there's all sorts of good outcome stuff that's going on. But a key component of general education assessment is, in addition to looking at student growth on outcomes, which is important. You've got, like your general program is a nice course-based eval of that. In addition, the pedagogies that are taking place in those classes is an important part of helping those classes get more effective at promoting general education outcomes. That component is not there. That's why the input experiences outcomes slide piece is there. That gathering some student perceptions, and you actually do have this information already on campus about pedagogies, about things, is a useful component of general education and improving general education. So for example, if you were to use rubrics to evaluate students' growth on your public affairs outcome, and you find that students aren't growing on that as much as you would like based on student artifacts, looking at it over time, nice look at that. The question might be, well, why not? One thing might be, well, what are they experiencing? What kind of assignments are they getting? What are they getting in their classes, et cetera? So the idea that these kind of experiences can become part of what you're considering when you're looking at outcome growth and say, well, this is how we might boost it, this is why we might not be going as far as we want, or this is why it's going really well. It's a component of it. Quality of teaching matters in the growth of general education. In fact, it's intrinsic to it.
So if I have this right, you're saying student experiences can be part of general education assessment.
Good form, absolutely.
So you're saying that student experiences can be part of a general education assessment plan?
Another useful thing you can do in terms of general education assessment, again, it's very easy, but we've done this at institutions, and it's really very useful sometimes, is to gather a group of seniors and to ask them what are the one or two most important things they've learned in their general education courses. Find out if they know which courses those were. The most important things you can learn those. Again, not dispositive, it's not the thing to tell, it's another piece of information about how, what holistic sense they're making of it, that informs the other work you're doing at the course level and other things about what's going on.
You know, when you talk about student experiences, one of the things that, like in our department, we have a senior survey, survey,
Yeah.
find out about stuff, and I guess we find good information about that, I don't know. In terms of new department heads, she probably hasn't had to run those numbers yet, but, my feeling was that, why are we asking seniors who are leaving? Why are we asking juniors who then feel more invested in the process of giving us feedback and hopes that we're going to do something to make their stay better?
Absolutely.
And so I'm not, for me, I wasn't sure that just asking freshmen and asking seniors is necessarily the way to go. I always feel like sophomores and juniors have a lot to say about their
Yes.
experience, and
Yes.
we should listen and try to make it better for them while they're here.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Um, so.
That's really interesting because we met with some students today and they said, we really wonder, do faculty look at the evaluations and the feedback that we provide and then do they go make changes in their classes? And I was thinking, well, yeah, you don't really get to, like, if you graduate, you don't ever know what happens,
Right.
But if they're still here, they talk to other people who are taking the classes, that through the grapevine. So that's a really
Right.
good point. That seems to.
Yeah.
It is a good point, but I'm also talking about departmental stuff in general,
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say, so when we, this is thing about classroom stuff, about backwards design, you design backwards from sort of your goals. Well, I was thinking with departmental and program assessment, so what do you want, what would be useful to you? So if you think it's better than you, that's great. I think the good practice I would suggest from that is, as Gary suggests, is something that gives the information back to students that just, someone will leave a summary sheet saying, hey, this is what we heard last year. These are things we thought really came out more prominently and made a difference, so that they see that when they put in, when they respond to a survey, it's actually good.
And I think a lot of times in our department, because we haven't been able to increase faculty besides replacing people, and I'm sure that other people in Cole probably feel the same way. you know, we get a lot of the same things that we really do try to help, but
Yep.
it's so sometimes beyond our control to add more sections or to, you know, have more faculty or whatever it is that they want to do. But I do feel like there's a perception there that at least we're listening and trying to do something, and if we can address those things in the meeting, we can tell them that, as opposed to just going, yeah, you know.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, that's one of the most amazing things about the student interviews, which I never picked up. And actually, we've redone analysis to see this. So we look at like those big four, like the pedagogy. So let's take clear and organized instruction. And so it's really interesting that if you just ask some simple questions about, are the faculty prepared for class? Are the explanations clear? Is it organized? Very basic stuff. And people in K-12 would know this really well. That is actually correlated with persistence. Right? Students who experience more levels of those in their introductory classes will tend to stay around more in their institutions. Here's the rub. It's correlated with persistence. The reason it works is not because students are learning better, but because it's increasing their satisfaction. It's an indirect effect of satisfaction. So a lot of these measures, it turns out, like prompt feedback is another one. So one reason people talk prompt feedback a lot is because they'll research on the faster you get something back to someone after they've done something, the more feedback meaningfully into the way students are working. Almost every interview we've had about prompt feedback has they use prompt feedback as a sign of the commitment of faculty. Do people get stuff back to us in time so we can do better on the next assignment? If they say something back in a week, does it come back in a week? Does it come back in 2 months with the corners not folded on a pile in a chair with just a grade on it? In other words, they use the feedback that they're getting as an indication of the care, and that feeling that people actually have some commitment to them is what in turn binds them to the institution and probably improves their learning. This stuff's really interesting when you get down to it. It's not that the pedagogy is probably our way of showing that there are people more committed to being there. The more they think they're at a place where there are just people out there who are punching in, who will literally have faculty come in and say, I was forced to teach this course, I'm not interested in it. I've heard these things from interviews, I've heard them corroborated. The more they see a person who comes in just before class who hasn't had any time to prepare because she just got the assignment the day before as hired as a just-in-time instructor, students see those things. They understand they can't go meet with her someone because she doesn't have a day in office. They then develop a sense of the institution, and that then redounds to how they engage that institution.
In your data, did you see any indication of a mismatch between the student's epistemology and pedagogy?
Do we see in our data any? Well, probably we have developmental data on moral reasoning where you would see a difference between that because the moral reasoning stuff we use is based on a cognitive development scheme. And what you'll see is their sort of epistemology in the first year in terms of where the world is completely mismatched with some freshman level courses what they're trying to do. I think we've heard more about that in terms of a different way that I think you're thinking about developmentally.
Well, somewhat developmentally, but also what their expectations are when you think about trying different kinds of pedagogies. They expect, I teach sciences.
Yes.
They expect that the laboratory is going to reinforce the lecture. But if the laboratory is exploration for the lecture, they get all upset and it shows up on our lab. The labs don't go to the lecture.
Yes, absolutely. They prefer to memorize oftentimes. They can handle a task by memorizing, even the fact that most of the people, that's what they'll do. So that mismatch is there all over the place. And that's why, getting back to what I asked you before, they often don't know or have never had to do higher order things to be successful. They are also like faculty who don't want to do assessment. Look, the same way the faculty don't want to unearth things that are bad about them, students don't want to engage in a risky exploration-based lab, which are not sure of the results, and they want to get a good grade. They don't want to engage in those risky strategies either. So that's why some sort of scaffolding is needed, which says, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it. You will have some problems in this lab. I don't know if you're doing this kind of laboratories where they're trying to explore, and it's not pre-canned, whatever, to help them understand what's coming at them, and it's going to take repetition. So it's mismatched all over the place. The value of grades as an outcome. What is the easiest way to get a grade? Yeah. And then the other place we see it is among students who are less prepared. So less prepared students who don't know things like, should they go talk to faculty if things go wrong. do they have an understanding of where their actual grade is compared to what they think their grade is?
Well, no, they're doing just fine, so they're making it easy.
Exactly. But part of that is the lack of social privilege. I mean, experience. So part of the educational function is so that students can be one test before the end, and they somehow manage to think, yes, I've gotten a 40 on each of the first 2 tests, but I'm going to apply an A in this course. So we can look at that as bad thinking, but how do you get them out of that? That's actually, and especially when that view is actually more prevalent on people who have come from less advantaged backgrounds, with less experienced academic success in high school, who come from different places. How do learning how to learn thing is critical. I had mind-blowing interviews at some of the historically black universities we were. Mind-blowing. Because with some of the students at the historically black universities we worked with, because you had students who were obviously bright, articulate, incredibly motivated, high aspirations, who had not made the connection yet that, oh, I should be reading a lot, or this course may require a lot of effort. They just hadn't had that in high school. Who understood that, oh, if I screw up early on, I should go talk to a person.
I had no idea what to do if they weren't doing well.
Yeah.
Because so if you do poorly on a
Yeah.
test assignment, what do? I mean, study harder. The same thing I was doing. They just didn't know where to go or what to do.
So the tools and the aspirations are completely mismatched.
Yep.
And how they learn those.
So I'll switch gears, if you don't mind. I'm the shy retiree.
I noticed that.
When you go back to the interactions with diversity,
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm on several diversity committees
Yeah.
here at the university. Interactional diversity.
Yeah. We can actually give you the questions on these things. A lot of these, they're actually going to run them. So you can actually see what we're talking about.
Yeah, so, the importance of, we're being told diversity, talk about this minority scientist in your class. It's like, well, I don't see that as a meaningful interaction.
Yeah.
And what kinds of things have you seen that were meaningful interaction?
Depends on you teach science, right? Well, I teach sociology. I didn't even have to try. It's just like it happened day one. I mean,
Yeah.
so I think some of it is going to be.
Well, and that's
discipline-based.
the trouble. We're in the sciences and
Yeah.
we're being told to bring in more of this diversity, and it's like,
But
well,
from student interactions, I did this survey about.
atom is an atom is an atom.
Yeah, no, it just happened, and so I think.
So that's
With neutrons.
yeah. I mean that's we talk about we have biodiversity.
Yeah, so I think, so the diversity is interesting. I want to be careful because I think you're focusing, I don't know if you are, but some of you are focusing on ethnic diversity. So if you look at some of the questions when we talk about this, it's encountering, I don't want to diminish that at all, but it's encountering ideas, beliefs, views, attitudes that are different from those you're familiar with. So if your experience here is like my experience in Indiana, encountering the theory of evolution, and understanding a probabilistic view of a physical or deterministic view of physical evolution is an encounter with difference that's profound for some students. For people in psychology or neuropsychology courses, the idea that encountering that every thought, action, will is connected with some concomitant brain activity is a powerful idea. So it can be on that level too as well. For us, it's what causes disruption, dissonance from your comfort zone in terms of your worldview and beliefs and so on. I'm not diminishing that having a black scientist as a teacher who would talk with both white and black students about his or her experience might be different than becoming a scientist would be also hugely powerful as well. I think the sections on here's George Washington Carver, this is what he did about it, those things tend not to be as effective because they're things you can memorize and walk away with.
Yeah. Well, this is what I wondered, what your
Yeah.
definition of the interaction.
I think the most profound part about it for us has been that weighs in on the flip side, which is even when you have diverse, structural diversity, as Kathy pointed out, that, for us, that was just literally sitting in a group of black and white students in a diverse place who are then talking about, we just don't talk about hair, right?
Yeah.
But actual deeper conversations about our beliefs, where we come from, who we are, that stuff, that's what changes these things.
And those are the conversations that don't often happen without some sort of scaffolding or help, because, I mean, people in general, just, you don't, most people don't seek out conversations that are going to cause that discomfort, that, oh, wait, all the things that I believed up to this point might not be true, or that people think differently, so.
Which science do you teach?
Biology. I also teach people to be science teachers.
Okay. Yeah, the other thing that you just, do you have a sense of the incoming beliefs about science and causation and?
Some.
I'm sure you intuitively have a really good sense, but it might be interesting at some point just to get us, I mean, I taught some classes on Darwin and Darwinism with Wabash.
Well, we do have some data,
Yeah, okay.
different between the majors and the non-majors. But, yeah, it's, even among the majors, it's interesting, and
Yeah.
even those who've been through an evolution class.
Oh, yeah.
Well, multiple regression myself.
But in fact, you may have, and so what was interesting, the Wabash for us, for example, was having, worked with Eric Hudson, a biologist, who's a devout conservative Christian. And we would talk about evolution with students, but the idea was to talk about how Eric, the students sort of made sense of that. And he comes from a church that has a very strong creationist model. But he makes that work. And so for the students, for having students involved in that conversation, that was really interesting. Shook them up a little bit. Yeah. That's what we mean by interaction. Meaningful interaction. You're incredibly patient with this. Thank you for your time. I'm sorry that you were these.
This is one of the better rooms, huh?
It really is.